Welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Rick. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to NSAR Day 2021. It's a very exciting day. Thank you, Tanya, and all the ladies behind NSAR for putting the day together. My name is Sandy Lee, and I am the co-chair of NSAR's New Diversity Task Force. And it is my privilege today to introduce our keynote speaker, Devine, who will speak with us on the topic of unconscious bias. Anne is the CEO and founder of Ashanti Leadership and Professional Development Services. She is an accomplished businesswoman, known and respected for her professionalism and willingness to support, coach, and mentor others. Her business provides extensive career and professional guidance in leadership development and social justice issues. Anne's work is underpinned by her knowledge, skills, and expertise in human rights and people management, and is also an advocate for those who are deemed invisible and do not have a voice in her community. And she strives to bring inclusivity to every aspect of her work. And welcome and thank you for being with us today. Tanya? Oh, something happened. Where did Anne go?
I don't know. I'm here, but I can't see you guys. I can't see anything.
It's okay. I can't either, Anne. But welcome and thank you for being with us here today.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Shall I get going?
Yes.
Thank you all very much for this wonderful invitation to speak with you today. I really, truly appreciate this opportunity. So I'd like to start by sharing my slide, if you don't mind.
Anne, we can see your slides, and I believe if you check your camera, we would be able to see you as well.
Okay, wonderful. That's brilliant. Can you see me now? For those of you who are wondering, what does she look like? So, as I said, welcome on this. Thank you for the invitation to be with you on this beautiful day of yours, your learning day. I want to say to the audience out there, forget about everything you heard on the resume. What is most important for you to know today is that I have 7 grandchildren, 4 of whom are Nova Scotians. And guess what? They might well be potential customers for the Nova Scotia Association of Realtors. So we've got to dream big. We've got to think of our vision for the coming years. We have to think about our future. But before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that we are invited to acknowledge the Mi'kmaq people on whose unceded land we reside. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people and we are responsible for treating each other with dignity and respect. February is African Heritage Month. It's a time of acknowledgement, and it's a time of celebration, a time of recognition. Some people would say African Heritage Month here in Nova Scotia, and across Canada, it is known as Black History Month. And the theme for across Canada is The Future is Now. And Nova Scotia has its own theme, is that our lives matter. Black history matters. And why does history matter so much to us? I think it's important for us to recognize that this came into being in 1926 in America, when Harvard G. Carter Goodson founded the Negro History Week to recognize Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln for the work that they had done in ending slavery. And in early 1950s, African Canadians started to recognize this as an important event for us. And here in Nova Scotia, in 1996, we started recognizing and celebrating African Heritage Month. However, it became official in the House of Commons in 1995 when Jean Augustine, the Honorable Jean Augustine, recognized February as African Heritage Month. And us here in Nova Scotia, many of us would have heard of Senator Don Oliver. He was the person who was responsible for taking history, African heritage history, to the senator for it to be recognized. And so in 2008, it became fully recognized across Canada, across the political spectrum. So why does history matter to us? If you get an opportunity to go online, please take a look at some of the events that are taken forward for this month. And our theme here in Nova Scotia is to listen, learn, share, and act. And so why does history matters? It matters because it creates for us a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, a sense of pride and purpose. It's our compass for the future because we know where we're coming from, and it anchors us to our ancestry and our roots. I will go back to this and pause here a little bit, because not everyone has the opportunity to trace their roots or even to trace their ancestry, as it were, because the African diaspora is so wide across the globe. And because of slavery, many of us cannot trace our ancestry. I'm delighted to say that 3 of my grandchildren will be able to trace their ancestry way back, probably to the 1700s. I cannot do that. My husband can, because of his American heritage and because of his Scottish lineage. He can trace his history back. In fact, he visited the plantation where his family were slaves. And to this day, the family still carries the slave owner's name, because in those days, that's how you were named. You didn't keep your own name when you were transported across international waters. Your name was being changed by the owner. So he can trace his back. I can't. Mine is a mishmash of various things. I can go back a generation or two, but that's as far as I can go. So we need to educate ourselves, and we need to understand where we're coming from. And so therefore, I have to do a lot of work on my part to support myself to understand my own history. And when we talk about listening and learning, we're trying to understand each other. We're trying to appreciate each other. We're trying to value each other. And we know from the death of George Floyd last year how important that has become for all of us to stop and to take note and to look at where we are going. But for me personally, Black History or Black Heritage Month is just one day, 1 month in the year. Every day is a day for me to celebrate 365 days of who I am, who my family are, and where we will be going in the future. So when I think about the invitation that you have offered me today, It took me back to my own personal experience. It took me back to my parents' experience. For example, when my parents went to the UK, where we were raised, they went to rebuild the mother country following the Second World War. And their purpose was to support the British government, the British Empire, as it were then. And so when they arrived, even though they were invited, many of them didn't have homes. And many of the English people didn't want Black people in their homes. In fact, they were met with notices that said, no Blacks, no Irish, no dogs. But as they began to develop themselves and grow economically, they wanted to own their own homes after renting for a period of time. And in order for them to do that, they couldn't go to the bank and get a mortgage by themselves. As Black people, they had to have a front person. So that front person was the broker, and that front person was often a white male. And sometimes that front person would run off with their money. And so they're having to start the process all over again. Fast forward, when I had my first job as an education social worker, and I was earning more money than my parents. My father said to me, instead of purchasing a new car, I want you to think about buying a property. So at the age of 23, I had my own property. I earned my own home. And this is critical because this is the biggest purchase of our lives. And according to our culture, the culture that I was raised in, education was critical. Having a good job, particularly if you had a government job, if you were a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you were a professor, those are the individuals that I was raised, that circle. And then you own your own home. That was a significant achievement. So when we moved to Canada, there was no question about what we were going to do. We were going to own our own homes, our own home as well. So that is all part and parcel of building your economic wealth. And so by building such economic wealth, you can pass it on generationally. One of the wonderful things about our Premier McNeill that I will always take away from him is that he said in 2017, while he was attending the Nova Scotia Human Rights Day, he said to us that it is his vision that we can see ourselves reflected in society at every level. And when he talked about that we, I believe that he was talking about the collective we, that all of us, irregardless of who we are, irregardless of our race or gender or religion or sexual orientation or wherever we might be coming from, we must see ourselves represented at all levels of society. And so therefore, it is important that even in our home purchases, even in our home rentals, because our home, as I was raised to believe, they would say the Englishman's home is his castle. And yes, indeed, our home is our castle. It is the place where we feel most welcomed when we walk through the door. It is the place where we create our family structure that builds the strength of our communities. It's the place where we feel most loved. One of the statements that impressed me most, and this is why it's so important that we see ourselves reflected even in home purchases. And I think that's why you invited me here, for us to have a consideration, for us to listen, share, and learn from each other, and then take action to ensure that no one is left out, regardless of who you are. If you want to own your own home, there must be structures in place to help you with that. Unfortunately, it has not always been the case that we have those structures in place. So when your president said, I looked at pictures of NSAR's presidents and wondered how the oldest Black community in Canada have been represented by me, meaning a Black person, over all these years. Now that is quite a responsibility. It's an honor. It's a privilege. It's a sense of pride. And it brings immense joy to the community for someone to assume such a role. It also means that when I see Chris, it means that I am encouraged, or I can say to one of the individuals, another young person, for example, today is the day my daughter celebrates, and her family will be celebrating 1 year of being in their new home. Now, someone amongst your membership engaged with them, gave them a positive experience, supported them, and helped them to establish themselves in their new home, where their family can feel that sense of pride and that joy that I felt when I owned my first home. Your organization, you as people, you impact thousands of lives in our province and beyond. You do not do it only by yourselves, but along with industry partners. You hold significant power and significant privileges. And so when we think about how we respond to individuals, one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that how we feel about certain groups of individuals, they don't come into play. And this is why we want to talk about bias, unconscious bias. And Howard Ross, in his book, Everyday Bias, speaks to us and tells us that as human beings, this is the way we navigate our world. He referenced that we are routinely biased, profoundly biased. And as human beings, that's who we are. Our brains are hardwired to be that way. And in primal times, it was the way that we knew who were our friends and who were our foe. But today, if left unchecked, our biases and how we behave towards different people, if left unchecked, it can morph into discriminatory behavior. And so if we are not exposed, if we are not open, we will continue to believe the stereotypes that we have been raised to think or believe about other individuals in our community and around us, and how they are portrayed in the media. Take, for example, Maxwell Johnson an indigenous man who had been banking with this particular bank for several years, took his 12-year-old granddaughter to open a bank account. And when he arrived, the teller did not believe that his identity was the person who he said he was. And so therefore, they had a kind of remonstration, and you can follow this in the news, which led to him and his granddaughter being arrested. She did not believe that this was the person he said he was. Similarly, in 2017, in the United States, we would recall what happened when Starbucks had to close thousands of their stores in order for individuals to undergo sensitivity training because one of their staff members got into some difficulties because of racism or unconscious bias. The lack of belief in the individual to recognize who they say they are. And this happens around us. And I know by having your diversity committee, I know these are the things that Sandy and her team will be focusing on to root out bias, to ensure that your organization has a solid foundation where every customer, every potential buyer, every young person, regardless of if they have a disability, if they're a transgender, of their religion, their sexual orientation, whatever it is, their economic status, they will be given a fair treatment. As I said, you impact thousands of lives. You engage with diverse communities of people. You partner with industries. When you think of the banks, when you think of the home inspectors, you think of surveyors. I don't know. Yes, they're different from the home inspectors because sometimes it's about land development as well. Some people, I know of a young person, a young immigrant who was here, who has been here for the last 4 years, recently bought a plot of land, built their property, and moved in late last year. So there's some significant growth that's happening within our communities with the diverse people that you meet every day. You also hold significant powers. And that power is also, it influences decision making. When you think about the new subdivision that's been built, who gets introduced? And we will talk about this, will emerge more. Who are introduced into the neighborhood? When we look at the economic indicators as well, your organization is in a position to influence government, influence decision makers, influence policymakers. And that influence has generational impact. Take, for example, this is something that's well known in our history. What happened in Africville? The removal of that community, the unsettling of those individuals from the park where they had been established since the 1800s, still have reverberation today. Many people have been dispersed beyond the shores of Nova Scotia. And it's written into our history as one of the ways that realtors, businesses, government had chosen to redline certain groups of individuals because of their economic status. And for those of you who don't know what redlining is, simply put, it is when banks outright deny mortgages to people based on their groups, their cultural background, and their geographical location, and their neighborhood. And these policies, as I said, have far-reaching consequences generationally. You also have the power and the influence to decide which communities will flourish, where the parks are based, where the businesses are placed. And many people will talk about the fact that as African Nova Scotians have shared that as Black people, they're not able to walk around freely in the south end of Nova Scotia because the police would be called. And this is no news story. Everybody knows that there's certain groups of individuals who cannot, or their properties might not be sold to certain groups of individuals because we want to preserve what we have within our communities. And I do have experience of that. For example, where I was raised in the UK, where we see when, diverse groups of people are coming into certain communities, the white communities would move out and establish elsewhere. I have to say, one of the beautiful things about the community in which I live, here in Nova Scotia, it's a very diverse community. And on any given day, I can walk on the street and someone will say good morning, or someone would say hello. With the exception of the occasion when my husband last year was on the crosswalk and someone told him to get his black ass off the crosswalk. And that was one of the first time we had encountered direct racism in our community. But then we know that consciously or unconsciously, things are happening below the surface. And so where do these biases come from when they are lurking beneath the surface? They come from our social location, our schools, our institutions, our universities. They come from stereotypes, what we were told about others, what you're being told about immigrants, African Nova Scotians, persons with disabilities, those individuals with accents. For example, recently, France passed a law banning individuals from discriminating against people with accents because the North and the South, they had different accents. And so people were being discriminated in terms of jobs, finding homes, and such likes. Our attitudes and our beliefs has a tremendous amount of impact because of the things that we have heard over time and time again. They might not be directly related to us. When that person comes to you for an interview to discuss the relevancy of purchasing their home, you may not have met a person from the Middle East, but the assumption that that person has a lot of money. Lebanese people, for example, people tell me this all the time. That's why they're building all the apartment buildings. I don't know what if that's true or not. Immigrants Some individuals who come here, certain groups are seen as having money, others are seen as not having. And how do we relate to those individuals? People have told me that in recent times, there is a queue of something like 54 individuals to get an apartment and affordable housing. These are some of the issues, these are some of the struggles that people of color, new immigrants, new Canadians are experiencing here in Nova Scotia. Many of them have shared that oftentimes they're having to demonstrate that they have twice as much as the deposit, or they've got to pay 6 months' rent in advance, have a long credit history, have a guarantor. And this is for no clear business reason. But these are some of the things that are requested from individuals who it is assumed that they cannot pay their rent. Or they might even be told that because you have so many children, you can't stay here. So you as policymakers, government agents, change agents, decision makers who have impact generations, you have a job to do. Because these are often where the boundaries are blurred. Because we are not quite sure. Our government here in Canada do not collect statistics on race or even on purchasing homes and what those statistics looks like. We don't have that. So we can only go from what people have told us or from what we know anecdotally or from our personal experience. So there's a lot of work to be done amongst ourselves as individuals. We know that our business, the business that you're in, is a business of significant importance. And so therefore, we really have to listen to what individuals are saying to us. And sometimes we have to connect with the communities, get to know the individuals, and begin to collect those statistics, those anecdotal information that we're hearing, and seek to address them. Some organizations are trying to do this. However, we know that some people are experiencing challenges because some are trying to collect this through digital information. And we know that sometimes these algorithms are not actually correct because it's what we put in those information that we eventually will get out. And we also know that our biases can impact. So we're having to check ourselves. And the best way to overcome this is to create tools that will help us to diminish the question of bias. We have to work with our banks. And many of you may have preferred banks that you work with. Preferred surveyors, preferred home inspectors, who you feel might be more favorable or listen a little bit more or somewhat more empathetic. I'm not saying to you not to do your job, because having good credit is critically important. But sometimes even having good credit doesn't necessarily cut the mustard for some organizations. As I said before, who gets shown around in the good neighborhoods? We have to question ourselves. Where are the good schools? You know, when we came here in 2004, we were very, very privileged to be where we were, where we decided to settle. We didn't have a realtor. We were just happened to be circulating, driving around in this neighborhood, and we saw a house for sale. It was a private sale. And it was one of the show homes, the RS 2000. And we were really excited. And I have to say that our bank of choice was very, very favorable towards us because we had a great employer of choice who invited us here. And that makes a tremendous difference because we didn't have the struggles that many of our colleagues and friends have had as new immigrants, or even as people who are living here in Nova Scotia. I was fortunate to meet, and I know very well, the first African Nova Scotian who was able to get a mortgage. Can you imagine? That was in my lifetime. And her family are still alive in the Preston community. So we can see that these biases that we're talking about, discrimination and racism, still happens today. Because if I speak to some groups of people, when I have conversations with them, they will say to me that we are in a redlining district and we're not going to get those favorable houses as we won't get favorable treatment. So, are members consciously aware of the decisions that they make? Perhaps not. Perhaps you've been influenced by your upbringing, your social location, the people that you associate with, those individuals who are in your social circles, because that's what unconscious bias is about. We stay within our circles as human beings. We prefer to be with people who look most like us. And even babies have preferences as to who they want to be with. They know. Our 6-month-old grandson prefers to be with his papa than me. And grandmothers are supposed to be the nurturing figures. But I don't take care of him during the course of the day. You see, his papa does. And so therefore, when he sees his papa, no matter how tightly I'm holding him, he's leaping out of my hand to get to his papa. So, here are some things that we need to think about. And I'd like someone to do me a time check because I'd like to leave a couple of minutes for questions.
Sure,
Jacob?
Anne. You
Yes?
have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll try my best and finish off and pause. We have gender bias. What is the leadership in your organization? Where are the women leaders? Are they given prominent positions? Or are they left behind? Now we're required to have 50% on our boards of gender balance. And I hope we don't have to wait 30 to 180 years before we achieve that. We talked about racial bias. What about cultural bias? A person may not necessarily be of a different race, but because of our perception. And how do we see also the indigenous population? How do we relate to those individuals? How do we relate to the Acadians and those individuals from the Celtic community and Gaelic community as well. There's so much for us to think about. And institutional bias is where it is so rooted in the foundation, the policies and the practices that we are so familiar with, but are reluctant to let go of. And we don't want to change because it might be too difficult. But we do need to change because our current situation, the spectrum of diversity within our organizations, within our cultures, demands the change so that everyone in our community, everyone in our organization has the opportunity to bring their best self to work so that there's nothing lurking beneath the surface. You know, the iceberg where we only see 10%. But there's so much that's below. How do we engage with our multi-generational workforce? We have 5 in our workforce right now, 5 generations. How do we ensure that people from diverse voices, diverse communities have a voice? Take time out to listen to your colleagues from diverse backgrounds, so that they can add value to the discourse. You have 32 employees, I believe, in your organization. And how diverse is that? Who gets employed? Who gets promoted? And in this pandemic situation, who is being mentored offline, as opposed to those who are not being mentored at all? And it might be nothing. It has nothing to do with their race, their gender. It might be just that someone's taken a dislike to that person. For whatever reason, it could be something that has happened way back into your psyche that has nothing to do with the individual before you. But yet still, we have those biases. And what does your mentoring plan look like? Who gets sponsored for the next role? Who gets the sweet projects to help them develop themselves professionally when in fact everyone should be given the opportunity? And what does your community look like? Who do you include within your social circles that is from a different culture? Here are some of the amazing stuff about your organization. And within that, there's an opportunity for so much more, for your organization to be expanded, to become more diverse with your professional groups. You have influence because those individuals that you're working with every day have a responsibility to treat everyone with dignity and respect. And this is where your influence, your position of privilege can be used to educate, to listen, to share, and to support others. And finally, I know there's a shortage in the housing stock, and the prices are going up from what I understand. So that tells me that the place where I have chosen to live is growing. Thank you. I'm going to stop there, and for anybody who wants to ask a question, and this is a question that I posed for you. Who do you serve? And how are you preparing for the next generation of home buyers?
Anne, thank you very much. I would invite those who have a question to use the Q&A feature in your Zoom. And Anne, are you able to see the Q&A feature as well, or would you like me to just read those out as they come in?
Please read it because I can't see.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Tanya.
Sure, we'll just give people a couple of minutes. Are there any questions for Anne? Just use the Q&A feature, please. I'll just give people another minute. We have lots of nice comments coming in as thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
All right. And I don't see any questions right now.
Thank you.
Again,
Well, go ahead, Tanya.
no, lots of good comments. People saying, great speaker, lovely to hear this information, appreciate it, and also lots of information to think about.
Yes.
Amazing presentation, great speaker. Now, we do have a couple of questions.
Yes.
One from Paul. Where does ageism fit into your presentation or this topic?
It very much fits into this topic. I can assure you of that because the spectrum of diversity is broad. So I apologize if I have left anything out. The LGBTQ community also comes into this. Persons with disability. There's so much that we need to consider. We have to take a holistic approach, and we have to open ourselves to new learning. And this is why it's so important for us to have these conversations, because it's when we have these conversations, individuals like yourselves would raise these things. And so it lends to our creativity and our innovativeness. And this is why it's so important. One of the areas that I missed out, and I wanted to ask about women in commercial trade here. The Canadian, I think it's called the Crew Network. Is there such a network here in Nova Scotia? And how are those women faring? That's what I would like to know.
Thanks, Anne. And I don't see any additional questions at the moment. Again, just some lovely comments and people really indicating that this has been valuable information for them. So on that note, Sandy, I will actually I do see a question coming in from Roger. With the increased immigration in Nova Scotia, do you see Nova Scotia's attitude improving or staying the same over the past year or two?
Oh, no, it's improved. Oh, no. Roger, things are getting better. I can say that because I've been here for almost 17 years. And when I came, I wondered, what on earth? Why did I leave the UK and came to this godforsaken place? I didn't like it. I left in 2014. And then I went to an event and I found myself talking about Nova Scotia. People said to me, why are you back here? You need to go back there and finish what you started. I came back to Nova Scotia. I came back with different lens. And I saw Nova Scotia differently. Yes, I can say quite categorically, things are changing. Change is slow. It takes time, but it's happening. The fact that new immigrants can come here, a young couple bought a plot of land and built a home from scratch. To me, that just blows my mind. And this is happening right here in my community.
And we do have another question that came in from David. How do we reach out to the various communities without showing evidence or showing signs of racism?
You know, the communities are always open. You build relationships. I'm not from Nova Scotia, David, and I had to work hard to build my relationship with Nova Scotians. I was invited into the community. I sat and I listened. I heard what they had to say, and then we begin to work together. It's when we go into the communities and try to tell the communities what to do. There are so many associations there. There's the Lebanese Association. There is the Nigerian Association. That's an incredible association. There is the United African Women's Association. There is the East Preston Ratepayers Association. There are so many community groups that you can tap into, and just invite them. And I would invite you to come to my session on the 22nd of February, 6:30. Drop me an email, because it's where women in business and leadership, women of color, we will be celebrating African Heritage Month. And it's an open event hosted every year by the library. And we get hundreds of people coming on board. I don't know what it's going to be like this year, but most definitely connect with the communities. This is a great time during African Heritage Month. Tune into some of the things that are happening, and then get to know the leaders. And that's the way how you're going to build your relationship. There's Asian Month in May as well. On the 1st of February was Hijab Day, World Hijab Day. So there's so many things that are going on in our communities that we can use as an opportunity to connect.
And Anne, we have one more question. This will be our last question. Do you think it is more difficult to move into a rural area than the city?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to say this, and I hope it's going to make you laugh. I said to my husband, had he taken me to rural Nova Scotia, somewhere like, even though I went there, I visited, and I promised them I could help build their population, because I have 7 grandchildren. At the time I had 6. Mulgrave, where they only had 6 children. And that's a tough area to move into. But where I live in Halifax, I told him, had you taken me somewhere like there, I would have killed you first and then divorced you later. So, yes, it is difficult, because you know why? We all want to be with people who look most like us. If we see individuals who look like us. I remember the first time I saw a black man in the Blockbusters, I ran home and I said to my husband, guess what? I saw such and such a person, and I'm so excited. And he said to me quite calmly, yes, honey, I know who that is. And he mentioned him by name. And I thought, oh, darn. We all get excited when we see those individuals who look most like us. That's nature. That's the level. That's how we are as human beings. But as we get to know each other, as we open ourselves to each other, invite individuals into our cultural intelligence, our circles, then it makes it easier for us to get into the rural communities, because people feel welcomed. That's all we want to do. We want people to feel that sense of belonging. We want them to feel rooted. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel that they are contributors of our society. And when we own a house, for many of us as immigrants, we have reached the pinnacle, because to have a house and to have a job and to bring security to the family is all we're asking for. And that goes for any human being, because it is a human right to have shelter, to have warmth, and to have a home, irregardless of whether if it is bought or whether if it is rented.
Thank you, Anne. Before we do our prize draw, I'll invite Sandy back on the line to close the session.
Thank you very much. And I would like to extend a sincere thank you, and on behalf of NSAR and its members, for this important session. We really appreciate and value your insight so much. Now,